What's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today we're doing one final playoff series breakdown because we have the NBA Finals set. Boston Celtics, Dallas Mavericks starting here in a few days, and a matchup that I'm incredibly excited for, and it seems like the whole basketball world can't stop talking about this. These are two teams that have taken wildly different paths to get here, yet feel like they match up in a really interesting way. The Boston Celtics, of course, kind of ran through the Eastern Conference this entire year. They were dominant in the regular season, grabbing the 1 seed by over 15 games, and it was really never in doubt after the first month or so of the year. And then when they got to the playoffs, they beat the Heat in 5 games pretty convincingly. They beat the Cavaliers in 5 games, and then ended up sweeping the Indiana Pacers in a series that was relatively close. Almost all the games were right down to the wire, but overall, there really wasn't a team that stood a chance against the Boston Celtics as they went ahead and made their second finals in 3 seasons. As for the Mavericks, it was a very up and down season. At the beginning of the year, they dealt with a bunch of injuries. There were doubts even coming into the season about whether or not the Luka-Kyrie backcourt could work, and eventually they got a bit healthier. Kyrie was full-time in the fold. Luka continued the heroics that he was doing all season and even leveled it up more. They made some big acquisitions at the deadline and really found that rhythm post-All-Star break to rocket up the standings to the 5th seed, and despite being the lower seed in every matchup so far, making the NBA Finals, going through tough teams like the Clippers, the 1-seeded Thunder, and the Minnesota Timberwolves, who knocked off the reigning champs in the second round. It was in large part due to the play of Luka and Kyrie, that star-studded backcourt, but almost everybody has stepped up. It's been a huge testament to the way this front office has revolutionized the roster over the past couple of years to get them back to the finals for the first time in over a decade. And these two teams set up what feels like could be a classic matchup for a number of reasons, not just because the basketball is seemingly going to be amazing, and we're going to talk about that a lot here in a moment, but also some of the narratives, like Kyrie Irving making his return to Boston to play in a city that doesn't seem to have a lot of love for him ever since he left the franchise. You also have Kristaps Porzingis playing his former team in Dallas, where, according to some reports we've gotten over the years, he and Luka Doncic, his former co-star, didn't always see eye to eye. You've got two coaches in Jayson and Joe Mazzulla who have been pretty ridiculed over the past couple of years, and yet they found a way to get their teams here, and one of them is going to be leaving here with a ring as a head coach. You've also got young stars like Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Luka Doncic trying to establish their legacies as young, maybe future Hall of Famers for each of these guys. There is a lot on the line, even with a guy like Al Horford on the Celtics getting up there in age. He wants to grab a ring. You've got guys in Gafford and PJ Washington who are on bottom feeders of the Eastern Conference at one point. Now they're suddenly competing for a championship. If Kyrie grabs the second ring, what does that mean for his legacy? There are fun storylines all over the place. Just strictly from a narrative standpoint, there may not have been a better matchup to see here in the finals. Starting off with the statistics, the Celtics have been the second best offense and the third best defense in the playoffs so far, with the third best net rating, the only team to have a double-digit net rating at that. The Mavericks are the 6th best offense, 7th best defense, with the 4th best net rating in the playoffs, which those numbers are all down compared to the Celtics, but it's hard to compare directly because they've played vastly different competition. Really, the point I want to get here across is these teams are both really good on both sides of the ball. They can score, they can defend. There isn't a weak point to either of these squads, which is part of why I think it's going to be such a fun matchup. In the 2 regular season meetings between these two teams, the Celtics won both. One win was by 9 points, and that was prior to the deadline in Dallas. And then the second game they played was after the deadline, with both teams relatively healthy, and the Celtics went out there and won by 28. It was a convincing wall-to-wall victory. That's not indicative of what's going to happen. I don't think the Celtics, spoiler alert, are going to dominate the Mavericks quite like they did in that game, but it does show that they had a formula that worked at one point. We'll see if it can carry over in the playoffs against a Mavericks team that, even though they've got the same personnel, have grown a lot as a squad over the course of this postseason. Which brings us to my keys to the matchup, and one of the biggest things that come to mind for me right off the bat is, can the Celtics slow down the Mavericks backcourt? Because Kyrie and Luka have been unstoppable this run. The way they've been playing, people have been starting to debate whether or not they are the most talented backcourt in NBA history, and I don't know what my answer is to that quite yet, but what they've been doing has certainly been worthy of at least a conversation around that. Luka so far is averaging 29, 10, and 9 throughout the playoffs, and his series against the Timberwolves was one of the most impressive of his entire playoff career, which is saying a lot for a guy in Luka Doncic who came into the playoffs with, I believe, the second highest point per game average by any player in the history of the NBA playoffs. He, against the Timberwolves, went out there and dropped an efficient 32.4 points per game, 9.6 rebounds, and 8.2 assists with 2.2 steals, including a 44% three-point percentage, which is just unbelievable against a defense in Minnesota that was one of the best that we've seen in a really long time. They had no answer for him, and that included the game winner, of course, he had over the reigning D-point Rudy Gobert, multiple big moments against Jaden McDaniels or Anthony Edwards or Nickeil Alexander-Walker, all these great defenders. None of them really stood a chance. And same thing with Kyrie Irving. His stats don't look insane throughout the playoffs. He's putting up 23, 4, and 5 on 49, 42, 83 splits, which is good efficiency, but especially in the second halves of a lot of these games, he is completely taken over, helping Luka close the door. He doesn't do a lot in the first half. He'll score a couple points here and there. Maybe his shooting percentage isn't the best, but there's something about that second half, especially down the home stretch of close games, where Kyrie Irving just flips that switch and suddenly the two-man game between them is just unguardable. Whether they're finishing on the inside through contact, they're stepping behind the three-point line and torching you from there, they're throwing up a million lobs to either Daniel Gafford or Dereck Lively or even PJ Washington. These two guys have found an incredible and almost unstoppable synergy between each other. And it's not just the Wolves, they also played a great defense, a top 5 unit in Oklahoma City with great defenders all over the place, like Lou Dort and Shea and Chet Holmgren down low, Jalen Williams, Cason Wallace, guys that can turn you over, and Luka and Kyrie, as well as this whole Mavericks team, still found ways to continuously get it done. They have been an unstoppable force so far. The question is, can the Celtics be the one to finally go ahead and slow them down? They definitely have the personnel, especially in that backcourt with Jrue Holiday and Derrick White, who are one of the best defensive backcourts in NBA history, and definitely the best in hoops right now. They are both all defensive level guys that can be a nightmare to face. And it doesn't just stop there, because there's great defensive versatility all over the Celtics roster. Like, you would imagine that this backcourt probably just goes ahead and matches up with Luka and Kyrie. That makes the most sense, and they might. Derrick White didn't have a lot of success against Luka in the regular season, so you could put him on Kyrie, put Jrue Holiday on Luka, and then go from there. Or you could also throw Jaylen Brown with some minutes on Luka as well, because according to the numbers, he had the most success against Luka in those regular season matchups. I wouldn't even be surprised if Jayson Tatum ends up with some minutes on Luka because of his size. Great, he is defensively 1 through 4. They can switch basically anything. They can guard anybody. It really doesn't matter. They don't have to have one set defender. If he starts getting cooked, it's just, shrug, whatever. We'll just hope that it fixes itself. They can switch things up continuously. They've got so many ways they can scheme you. Also, even with Kristaps Porzingis, when he comes back, assuming he is looking like himself, we'll talk about that later, you can certainly isolate him on an island, and that's the weakest link, but he's still a great defender with more foot speed than other bigs. He's able to contest shots really well, block shots if you attack downhill, and the great defenders around him can step up and help on drives as well. So this is a phenomenal Celtics defensive team, and maybe the best suited out of anybody they've seen so far, the Mavericks that is, to go ahead and slow them down. However, there's also a strong part of me that just feels like it may be impossible to stop Luka and Kyrie as a duo when they're playing off each other, when the other guys are hitting shots. They may just be unguardable. You may have to send doubles to get the ball out of their hands, although with the Celtics, maybe they're cool with just letting their, great defenders sit on that island, and if they're getting cooked, they're getting cooked, and you just try to more so shut down the auxiliary guys like a team like Minnesota did, but the Celtics feel like they could have a bit more success, and that does bring up the question, how will those auxiliary guys play, specifically the wings for the Mavericks starting lineup in Derrick Jones Jr. and PJ Washington. These two wing guys have been massive X factors throughout the playoffs for the Mavericks. I can tell you as a Thunder fan, I still have nightmares about PJ Washington sitting in that corner and knocking down threes. He shot 47% from deep against us for 17 points per game. One of the biggest reasons why they went ahead and won that series in 6 games. Extremely impressive shooting from him. If he can do anything similar to that against the Celtics, the Mavericks may just be impossible to beat. Now, he did shoot just 25% against the Wolves from the outside, so that is a little bit more concerning, especially going up against another great defense. They're going to need more from PJ. If he can play more like he was in the Thunder series than he was against Minnesota, the Mavericks are in a really good spot. So we'll see what happens from him, especially if the Celtics send a lot of attention at Luka and Kyrie. He's going to get looks that he has to go ahead and knock down. He has to be aggressive, attack inside, get on the boards, defend up, which we'll talk about in a moment, which is all stuff he's done at different points. He's just got to make sure he puts it all together for the Celtics series like I think he can. Same thing for Derrick Jones Jr., who shot 46% from the outside against Minnesota, 37% from deep throughout these playoffs as a whole. He's been huge, a revelation for this team this entire season, but specifically over these games throughout the Western Conference playoffs. He's going to have to continue to do this against this great defense. They need all hands on deck, everybody producing, to go ahead and beat this really tough Boston team, and if these two guys can step up, that's huge for opening up the game for Luka and Kyrie. This is going to be particularly important because the Mavericks have hit more corner threes than anybody this season. Well, the Celtics are one of the best in the league at defending that spot, so it's going to be a big point of tension. Luka and Kyrie are great at generating those looks. The Celtics are great at defending them. It's just going to be up to these two guys to go ahead and knock them down whatever they can. And this is all in addition to what they'll need on the defensive end, because those two guys are going to be tasked with trying to slow down the Celtics wings, which is one of my big keys for the Mavericks, is can they slow down Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown? Tatum, despite a lot of the criticisms throughout these playoffs, is still leading the Celtics in points, rebounds, and assists with 26, 11, and 6 up until this point. And then for Jaylen Brown, after a ton of criticism last year, especially following the Eastern Conference Finals against the Miami Heat, where there were all those left-handed dribbling jokes, and he was one of the biggest reasons why the Celtics didn't get that series win, he's come back and maybe just had his best playoff series ever in the Eastern Conference Finals, winning ECF MVP against the Pacers, and so far throughout the postseason has put up 25, 6, 3, and 1, while shooting 54% from the field and 37% from deep and playing great defense. This may be the best version of Jaylen Brown that we've ever seen. In fact, I would say it definitely is. Combined, they are the best wing duo in the league, and stopping the Celtics starts with slowing them down. DJJ and PJ have both held their own against some great talent so far, but this is certainly their biggest test. In addition to what they're going to need from them on the offensive end, they have to slow these guys down at least a little bit. One thing I do want to note is that Jayson Tatum has struggled with his efficiency up until this point, particularly from the outside, shooting just 29% from 3 coming into this series. He's extremely capable of bouncing back, and they're going to need him to against this really tough defense. So if the Mavericks can help maintain that lack of shooting from Tatum so far, that's huge. If Tatum can bounce back, big swing in favor of the Celtics. He really has to be better in terms of that efficiency against the Mavericks if the Celtics want to avoid a really lengthy series. This is a big chance for him to go ahead and erase how he performed in the 2022 finals and set a new standard going forward. One thing that might help Tatum out is the return of Kristaps Porzingis, whose health and overall return may be the biggest key to this entire matchup. He has been integral to them this entire season. He opens the game up a lot for Jayson Tatum as well as Jaylen Brown as a three-point threat, as a lob threat, that vertical spacer, someone who can give them a post dimension on offense, rebounding, putbacks. KP is huge on that end. And then, of course, defensively, as a rim protector, as someone who can just alter shots down low, he is extremely important. And the fact that they've been this good in the playoffs without him is extremely impressive. But this is their toughest challenge yet, and they're going to need KP's contributions on both ends to go ahead and make a championship happen, which is a tough time for him to come back because the Mavericks are a tough, physical team that's going to really force KP to work defensively, especially guarding those Luka and Kyrie-led pick and rolls. I'm sure they're going to find ways to isolate him on those scores. He's going to have to really work, and offensively, Gafford and Lively are tough defenders who aren't going to give up easy looks. He's going to have to battle on the boards. It'll be a pretty grueling return matchup for KP, who again has not played since that Miami Heat series. If he's himself, it's a big problem for the Mavericks, but if he isn't, things get way harder for Boston. And my final key is the question of who's going to outclutch the other, because that may be what it comes down to. In a matchup that's so evenly split in my eyes, or that could really go either way, you might just have to look at how those closing moments are going to go. And the Mavericks have been extremely clutch in the playoffs. They've gone 6-3, with Luka and Kyrie being two of the game's best closers, seemingly hitting every tough bucket they need to go ahead and get those wins. Guys like PJ and Derrick Jones Jr. knocking down big buckets, Lively and Gafford catching lobs. The Mavericks seem to always find a way to get it done, and that's been very well documented. But one thing I feel like people aren't talking about enough is that the Celtics, who have been routinely clowned for years for being a bad clutch team that falls apart in those moments, they've actually stepped it up a lot in the playoffs. They are 4-0 in clutch games with a number of big moments, including that Jaylen Brown shot against Indiana that was one of the most clutch shots I've seen in a long time. They've really not gotten enough flowers for executing the way that they have, especially without KP, who's big to that execution usually. If they've really put a lot of those issues aside with closing games, that's big for them. But this is a tougher matchup. We'll see what they're made of. And honestly, with these two teams being really close, it feels like it could just come down to who executes better in the clutch, with both these teams being really good in those moments so far. And for some final notes before we get into my official prediction, we definitely have to take a look at Luka Doncic's health. He looked pretty healthy against the Timberwolves, but there are still some moments where he's limping. That knee is seemingly still something that's up in the air. We'll see how he looks against Boston, as well as the fact that the Celtics do have home court advantage, although it's been weird for both these teams so far throughout the playoffs. The Celtics' only 2 losses so far have both come at home. They're undefeated on the road, while the Mavericks are 5-3 at home and 7-2 on the road, which has been a big reason why they've made it so far, not having home court advantage at all so far. So both these teams have been better on the road. I guess we'll see how that plays into the home court advantage thing. I don't know. I just thought it was something interesting to go ahead and mention here before we get into the prediction, which it's time for me to go ahead and make. This is the hard part. I really don't want to pick because I do think it can go either way. way, and I'm sure whoever I don't pick, their fans are definitely going to let me know about it in the comments, which, yeah, definitely make sure to go ahead and let me know who you have winning this series down below and how many games, who's going to win Finals MVP. I want to reiterate, this is going to be a really fun series. I think it's got a chance to be a classic. Great teams on both sides of the ball, very different pathways to getting here, big stars, really fun narratives. It feels like people are very passionate about each side. Some people think the Celtics are frauds, they don't stand a chance, and that Luka is about to be crowned as the best player in the world, which is definitely possible. And for the Celtics believers, a lot of people are thinking that the Mavericks don't stand a chance against this juggernaut that has dominated the NBA a lot of the year. It's very divisive, people leaning really strongly on either side, and if you think one team is going to win or the other, I don't blame you, because I really do think this could go either way. But for me, my official prediction is going to be that the Boston Celtics win the banner, going ahead and winning this one in 7 games with Jayson Tatum raising the Finals MVP. What it really comes down to for me is that the Celtics have been the best team in the NBA this entire season. They're not a perfect team, but they've been unstoppable on both ends, offensively and defensively, top 5 consistently. And up to this point, they're 76-20 on the year. It's just hard for me to picture a team that good losing 4 out of 7 games. They've got some experience on their side, having made a finals before. There are guys with experience on the Mavs side too, but not as much as Boston. They're getting KP back, although I think he could struggle to start. I do think he'll find a rhythm pretty quick with this team, and even if KP isn't 100% himself, I do still think the Celtics can go ahead and make it work. The Mavs have also went through a really tough Western Conference road between the Clippers and the Thunder and the Timberwolves, while the Celtics have kind of been chilling for the most part. They've got great personnel to go ahead and slow down this offense, the best out of anybody I would imagine. I think the Celtics go ahead and get it done. As for picking Jayson Tatum to win Finals MVP, I just feel like he's going to bounce back a little bit from some lackluster efficiency throughout the playoffs so far. I think he's in for some regression. Maybe he won't, and maybe it would be like Jaylen Brown or KP. I could see any of those guys, even Jrue Holiday or Derrick White, to be honest. That's how good the Celtics are. Like, the talent is absolutely on their side. But, I mean, I could also see the Mavericks getting this done. They do have the best player in Luka Doncic, who's proven to be enough against nonstop higher seeds. Kyrie has proven to be a championship-level second option. He's on a tear. Maybe they're just the team of destiny. I bet against them twice so far in the Thunder and the Wolves series, and I've gotten burned, so maybe I should learn up to this point. But the Celtics are who I picked before the season, coming into the playoffs. I don't think I'm going to switch up now. I'm still going to pick them to go ahead and win. Maybe I'm making a mistake, but that is my pick. Celtics in 7, Jayson Tatum as the Finals MVP, as the Celtics raise their first banner in over a decade. With all that being said, that's my prediction and my overall thoughts on this series. Let me know down below in the comments, like I said earlier, who you have winning, how many games, who's your Finals MVP, and who are some of the X factors on either side. I'm really excited for this one. I love talking and thinking about it. I really do think this could be a classic. Fingers crossed that it is, and it doesn't end up as a disappointment, because there have been some series so far in the playoffs that have ended up being that, despite feeling like they could be really good. But I think this one is really going to be a lengthy series that could go either way, with some all-time performances. Knock on wood that does end up being the case. But for the moment, I appreciate you watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Going to be doing a breakdown of every single game after it happens here in the finals. And of course, plenty of content still coming in between games and throughout the offseason. Don't worry, the channel is not going anywhere if you're new. But yeah, I appreciate you watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.